And now over to General Johnson.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Pleased to introduce Major General Retired Ken Merchant, goes by Merch. He's got an incredible active duty career as well as his ongoing career in the commercial business world. His last assignment as active duty was actually on the air staff in the Pentagon, Director of Global Reach Programs, responsible for all of the airlift and tanker programs, but also trainers and special ops. I wanted to point out that he's been a program manager for a multitude of key major weapon systems for our Air Force, including the KC-10, E-4B, the Air Force One, E-3 AWACS, F-22, as well as a multitude of many of our weapons, if you will, that are in use in combat today. The Joint Standoff Weapon, and of course AMRAAM, Lantern, those types of weapons. Some key command assignments: Commander of AWACS and AEWC Systems Group, Commander of the 551st Electronic Systems Wing. He's the Vice Commander of the Ogden ALC, Director of Logistics for Headquarters AMC, and Commander for the Air Armament Center down in Eglin. Since retiring, he joined Lockheed Martin as the Vice President of the F-22 program, and now is the Vice President F-35 Global Sustainment. So quite a diverse background. Welcome, Merch. Look forward to your comments today.
Well, good afternoon. Thanks, Chuck, or good morning wherever you are in the country today. I hope everyone is safe and spending the holidays or getting ready to spend holidays with family. Tom, are you able to see charts? Okay, great. All right, well, what I thought I'd do today, and Chuck, thanks for that introduction. It's, you know, I just got lucky and got to spend a 34-year career in uniform and got introduced to the mobility world when I got out to Tinker in 2002. And I've had a long association with ATA and with the weapon system that you all use and employ. As Chuck mentioned, I made the switch over to the contractor side and got back into the fighter world. And I was loving life as the F-22 lead, and my boss made me an offer I couldn't refuse to move over to F-35. And it's definitely a very complex program, and we can talk about that if you'd like. But what I thought I'd do today is talk a little bit about defense acquisition. There have been a lot of improvements. There have been a lot of initiatives along the way. The question is it on the right track? Are there things that we can be doing better? Just willing to have a little dialogue with you all on this if you're interested, and let's just walk through some of the slides we pulled together. So I'll go ahead and I think I've got control of the slides. You know, this picture, I use something similar to this whenever I go to DAU to talk to the acquisition logistics communities there. You know, in 2014, I retired in August of 2014, came to work for Lockheed in October. And I went from being a very credible patriot on the left-hand side to being just another contractor who may or may not have credibility, if you will, on the other side. So I will tell you this, though, you know, we, on the government side, we had a tendency to look at contractors with a jaundiced eye, a bit prejudiced, if you will. And I will tell you, since I joined the Lockheed Company, I've been here a little over 6 years now, I haven't found a person here who isn't dedicated to the warfighter, who isn't trying to improve their way of life and get capability out in the field. We are a business. We do have to make money in what we do. So sometimes that might create a viewpoint from the customer side that might not set right. But in the end, I will tell you, I've got folks here who will work as long as anybody, you know, 10, 11 o'clock at night if necessary or later. I've got folks who support units in the field and deployed forward who will do anything they need to do to make sure the missions go. So I think that's the good news in all this is, you know, you do have a dedicated partner on the industry side. If you've been around the business at all on the defense industry side or on the customer side, you know about better buying power. Something that Frank Kendall started several years ago. It's been iterated 2 additional times over time. Bottom line is it's focused on how do I get field systems faster? How do I get things out there to keep pace with the threat? How do I bring acquisition and sustainment costs down? If you've been through any of the DAU courses or been around the business long enough, you know 75% of the sustainment cost of the weapon systems are on the sustainment side. So after that delivery of the jets is where the bulk of the costs come from. If we don't design that in up front, those considerations in up front, then we will end up paying more money along the way. And having been on F-22 back in the early days when I ran the airframe part of the program, you know, we really had a well-designed jet from a sustainment standpoint. It had access panels for batteries and anything you had to access on a daily basis. You pushed a button just like you do on some of the legacy airplanes, and you had immediate access to that part. You didn't have to remove 100 fasteners or unbutter a panel to get to it. And unfortunately, what that forced on a stealth side of the equation, which was the primary reason for having this airplane out there, was a lot of extra seams and gaps, which don't do well as far as RCS is concerned. So we had to do trades. And even though our intent was to make it a very maintainable and sustainable airplane up front, we had to go back and combine a bunch of those panels, and that caused the jet to then not be as maintainable, but it was a much better performing jet as far as operations go. So again, always trades that have to happen in there. The other thing is making sure that the organic depots remain whole. There is Title 10 50-50 rules that say that 50% of the workload at the DoD level needs to be done in the organic depots, and Congress is a constant watchdog on that. And it's good for us from an industrial base standpoint. It's great to have that capability inside the government, both in normal day-to-day operations as well as in a surge capacity when things happen. Chuck mentioned I was AMC A4 for a total of 4 years. And during that time, we did the surge to Afghanistan. I was able to work with my depot counterparts to get jets delivered out of depot lines faster, weeks early, months early, so that when we got ready to make the surge, we had every jet available that we could possibly fly. And that's how we got through that movement. The other thing the government's interested in is what they call owning the technical baseline. This is something that my last boss in the Air Force build a plant was championing. I'm sorry, that's a hard word to say. But the idea is know enough about the baseline, have control of that baseline, have the technical data that you need to be able to own that baseline so that you have flexibility later on. If you want to do mods, if a certain supplier or even the OEM decide they no longer want to be in the business, then you have the data that you need. There's a cottage industry around a lot of our organic depots that does nothing but recreate parts that we no longer have readable or legible drawings for, and reverse engineer those systems for aging airplanes. This mindset keeps you from having to do that long in the future. You would have that tech data available. Another thing that's going on, and if you've probably heard the word agile before, I know when agile brings a lot of different connotations to people's mind. I think of agile as that hitting that first point under better buying power. How do I get that system out there so I can keep pace with the threat? Think about your iPhone. When that iPhone delivers, it's got a new software load, iOS 10, 11, 12, whatever, to go with that new phone. Almost a day later, or less than a day later, sometimes there's an Apple update that's being pushed. There's a .01 or a .02 or whatever coming out. It's not because they didn't fully think through things. It's because you can't fully think through. You can't guess ahead of everything. So what the software industry has done is they've gotten to a point at where people like Facebook have up to 10,000 different OFPs, if you will, what we would call an OFP for an airplane, operating at any given time. If I'm a software engineer and I want to put something on, and I've worked on a little subroutine that provides new capability and allows you to see a new emoji, something really simple. As long as I've tested my system and I know the system's not going to crash, and as long as I know I can back out of it immediately if it does crash somebody else's software, I can push that to the net and it's on the system that night or that day, that within hours. Now think about that in an airplane that flies 300, 400, 500 miles an hour. You've all gotten in your car these days and it pops up and says there's software update available. Well, if I'm flying along at 600 knots and about to drop a weapon, I don't want a screen to pop up and say, hey, OFP update 6.4.2 is available. Would you like to download it now? I don't think so, right? So we're never going to get to that point with this. But by the same token, taking 2 and 3 years to build a software load and put it in the field is way too long by the same token. It's just the opposite end of the spectrum. So I applaud the efforts to get those innovative approaches out there. And what it's allowing us to do, and you've seen things like AFWorks where Dr. Roper's teams will go out, they'll hold a conference, and they'll actually issue contracts that day to a small startup group that can promise to deliver something very quickly. Now, the challenge is how do you integrate that into something like an F-35 like Lockheed does and make sure that you don't cause an airworthiness or safety of flight issue along with that, right? So there's a balance that has to happen. So my concern there is we see those new entrants coming in. Oftentimes they're not being asked to play with the same rules with the DFAR, Federal Acquisition Regulations, that we are held to on the big guy side. And sometimes it sort of gives them a leg up, gets that program into the field. And then the question is, how do you sustain that? How do you blend it? How do you make sure you can keep it flying? So there's a reshaping of the industrial base going on, and there's also a predisposition for insourcing because of that 50-50 rule that I talked to earlier. On F-35, the mantra coming out of the JPO has always been, we're going to take care of the organic depots, US depots first. We'll hit the OCONUS depots in Europe and Pacific second, and then we'll put money into any OEM repair capacity that we believe we need. It's a good starting approach. But when individual nations aren't willing to put money forward to stand up a capability in their theater, then you have to fill that gap somewhere. So you have to always have an alternate plan B then. But having that insourcing, having that government capability is critical to the whole enterprise. And then finally, it's got to be a collaborative approach. I've read the book How Google Works. And in that book, they talk about a scenario when they first purchased Android from Motorola and the Android operating system. And what they started out doing is they went down to Phoenix and they said, okay, talk to us about your customer. And the response was, oh yeah, that's AT&T and Verizon and T-Mobile and whoever, right? No, we want to know about the customer. Yeah, that's AT&T and Verizon. No, we want to know about the customer, the person who actually picks the phone up and holds it to their ear or searches on the phone to find some data. Oh, well, that's not our customer, that's their customer. So there they are, they're designing an operating system that they have the wrong target audience in mind. And sometimes I see that same thing happening in the acquisition community. And it's not all on the industry side, it's on the government side as well. ACC is the representative for the warfighter in the fighter community, and they establish the overall requirements, but it's the kid on the flight line who's going to maintain or fly that jet that we really need to be looking at and saying, are we making their job any easier, or are we adding to their workload with what we're trying to do? Okay, briefing's over. No, I'm just kidding. We'll go on. Got a couple of slides here. I want to just walk through some other points. So there's an emerging threat. You see the Chinese and Russian jets there that happen to resemble an F-22 quite a bit. That one on the right, that wing profile or landscape view looks just like an F-22. Tails are a little different. There's a reason for that. They stole our data and they had a head start. Those two missiles that are on there, one looks a bit like an AMRAAM. There's a reason for that. And I got to tell you, those two weapons are King Kong, and we need to be able to counter them very quickly. You see that carrier, you see those surface-to-air missiles. The threat will continue to evolve, and we've got to keep pace. So we must find ways to shorten the fielding time. If you look at the budget outlook, I won't go through every line on this chart, but the bottom line is we've got a new administration. It's going to take a new national security focus. The nation's been focused on fixing defense. If you listen to President Trump, he said, I've fixed defense. Here's how much money I've poured into it. Is the next administration going to keep that going? Even if Trump stays in office, would he be able to continue doing that? Typically, a second-term president, from my experience, tends to look inward and work domestic programs in their second term. So no matter what we see is a flattening of the defense budget. We're kind of at the high water mark in 21, and we see that it's going to probably start turning over. You'll get some growth in there for inflation and other things, but in the end, the amount of money that's out there for modernization is going to come down. We're actually going to probably see a real decrease in spending or in real dollars over the FIDEP. So we've got to get smarter. We've got to figure out how to do what we can with the dollars available and really stretch those dollars. So again, on F-35, my, excuse me, one of my reasons for working the program, or one of my goals of working the program, is to drive that sustainment cost, that cost per flying hour, down to $25,000 per flying hour in 2012 dollars, and get it down to which really fourth gen territory. So you get a fifth gen fighter at fourth gen cost. There's a lot of challenges there, but we think we're on the right path to make it happen. But that's the kind of thinking that has to go into that. Now, that doesn't say that I've got requirements that were put on the contract in 2000 when the program was in its inception that shouldn't be relooked at. To me, that's part of that affordability mindset. I've got to go back and look at priorities. Okay, you want this additional capability to counter what the Russians are going to do with their weapon system. What are you going to trade? What are you going to give up to get that capability? Because there's just not going to be enough dollars there to just keep adding to the game. Okay. Again, I think I hit this one pretty good. There were some other points in there, and it was affordability was a requirement for a weapon system. It wasn't just a nice to have. I'm not sure we've really done a good job of getting to that yet. I think there's a lot more work that needs to be done. And again, it's got to be done collaboratively. Typically, what I found in my time in the Pentagon and program as a PEO, the department has a tendency to not trust what the contractors are doing. And rather than working with them to get to a common understanding, they recreate the entire budget estimate and then tend to be more conservative about it. And that's what drives cost up in the end on the program. And then, you should be using will and should cost to get there. Agree. That's how you drive productivity. Getting to economic and stable production rates. Before COVID, we were going to produce 144 F-35s this year. Now we'll be lucky to get 110 because we had to go work with suppliers to keep them whole and keep them funded. And we had to make sure that we were protecting our workforce. So we had to spread our shifts out so people weren't working inside that 6-foot space. Again, the goal is to shorten fielding times. It was also, and this is interesting, I think a lot of people don't or had forgotten about this part. It said incentivize industry productivity and innovation. Too often these days, what I see is incentives that are really disincentives. If you, Lockheed, are supposed to get me 80% MC rate and you fail, I'm going to take this profit away from you. Not, hey, we all believe we can get to 70. Here's your fee if you get there. If you get me to 75, you get this. If you get me to 80, here's another carrot out there, which is the way this is supposed to work. It does. The intent is to promote competition, because I'll be the first to admit, in my experience, the longer someone is building something or doing something, the more comfortable they get and the less aggressive they get. If we're working this together as a partnership, you can do targeted competitions within a major weapon system, and you can also do some things to drive that affordability piece within the program. I've run source selections on F-22 for the program office, with the program office on part of my team. They helped us build the RFP. They helped us do the tech eval. They helped us do the source selection. And they were there when I made the selection of the winner of the contract and the notification of the losers. But it was much faster for me to do it inside the program with less DFAR requirements being put on me than it was for the government to make that source selection. So there are lots of options out there. And then finally, improving acquisition tradecraft. Make sure that the guys and girls who are doing the acquisition work and who are in the requirements process are better informed consumers. What data do they need? What data do they have to make decisions? And how do they avoid gold plating weapon systems is one place that we all need to be thinking. Too often what I've seen in my career is, well, this is the only chance we're going to get to do a new mobility airplane. So I'm going to throw everything in the kitchen sink in there on the requirements, and I hope to get the best I can. And then the acquisition community puts that on contract. And what happens is, rather than being do your best, those are the hard requirements. Those are the KPPs, the key performance parameters, if you will. And you must hit those. And if you don't, then we're going to cancel the program. This is a high risk business. With the technologies we're dealing with in a lot of these airplanes, even on the tanker side, as we've seen lately, and with some of the new follow-on mobility stuff that's on the table, these technologies are still a stretch. They're not a given. And so they need to be treated that way, and the risk equation needs to be thought through. So the mantra in the agile software world is fail fast. The idea is to get as many options out there as you can in parallel. They're not all going to be successful. Think back to the 60s when we were crashing X-planes and killing pilots. And now I'm not saying we need to go back to killing test pilots by any stretch. Don't get me wrong. But what we were doing was we were trying to get ahead of the Russians at all cost. And as a result of that, we built the Century series. We had airplanes that were runs of 200-300 airplanes, not thousands like F-16s. And there's goodness in that. But the challenge then is, how does industry stay profitable when I'm only going to build 200 of these jets? Because the tooling that it requires, the hard tooling in the factories, is very expensive. And for that initial investment to get that out there, it's expensive for the government to put that out there, and then it's got to be sustained through the sustainment program, so I can tear jets apart in depot and replicate it at the depot locations so I can do mod work and such. That's an expensive proposition. And if I'm only going to build 100, 200 airplanes of a certain model, I don't know if I ever pay that off. And so that's a consideration that has to be made. The digital transformation we're all under right now, trying to go to digital jets, is key to that. And that may help us do some things that are much more flexible and more agile in the hardware world. We're not quite there yet. But again, you want to field faster. We're using those commercial software techniques to not only lead software programs, but to lead hardware programs. There are opportunities out there to use those agile techniques on the hardware side, and we've proven that on F-22 in a couple of cases where we brought in some startup companies and we're able to get hardware prototypes into our labs much faster than if we'd followed traditional ways of doing business. The Defense Innovation Board's been stood up. A number of design houses like Kessel Run and AFWorks are out there now. And I know some of the other services are replicating those capabilities. There's a rapid sustainment office now, which we've never had before, looking at ways to get things out in the field faster, to get to condition-based maintenance, which will reduce the number of manning or the amount of manning we have on our flight lines, potentially. Some of the challenges on this side is some of those new entrants, like I said earlier, are just not used to working under the DFAR. Some are kept out of the industry because they don't understand it and won't take that risk. If I do develop software faster and I push it to the flight test community, in many cases, we're finding that the test community doesn't have the ability to test it fast enough. They want to go fly the key points of the envelope, and even to do that takes too much time. By the time they do that, I've got another software load ready for them. By the same time, the end user may not be able to absorb those capabilities. If I push software to a user and all I'm doing is saying, okay, well, I had a situation where something wasn't working as promised. So what I asked you to do as a fighter pilot is a hand on the throttle, hand on the stick, and you've got to use your nose to push a button on the dash. Well, that's workload that you certainly don't want to have to do every day when you fly the airplane. If I take that away from you, where you just keep your hand on the stick, hand on the throttle, and every now and then you punch a button, or maybe at some point you think it, like back in Firefox or whatever that movie was with Clint Eastwood, then that's making your life easier. I can do that all day because I'm taking workload away from you. But when I start bringing new capabilities into the cockpit that you now have to go through simulator flying to determine or to get used to it before I put you in the jet, I can't do that every week. That will drive the flying community nuts, frankly. So we've got to balance that. So what we're starting to see is, hey, maybe quarterly software drops is too fast. Maybe every 6 months is a better way to do that. Or maybe I do the workload reduction stuff on the off quarters, and then on the on quarters I add capability. It's all going to depend on what the user community can absorb on that side. But the intent is to go fast, and if you go fast, not everybody's going to like the fact that you're possibly going to fail, particularly our friends on Capitol Hill. So again, this isn't all roses and sunshine. There are going to be some things where either the technology didn't advance as far, or we didn't make the right investments up front, and so we will have those kinds of challenges going forward, like we've always had. We're again trying to reshape the industrial base. We've got larger, more complex programs than we've ever had before. I tell the folks at DAU, you couldn't start with a clean whiteboard and develop a program more complex than the F-35. I was really fat, dumb, and happy on my single customer, single configuration, well, 2 configurations, but limited configuration F-22 program for about 4.5 years, and I rolled over to the F-35, where I've got 9 partner nations, a number of FMS customers, all of which who want it their way, Burger King style. I've got multiple configurations of the same jet. So it's essentially 3 different airplanes that sort of look alike. And everybody wants things done when they want them done because they've invested money in the program too. But I'd say it's a 4-dimensional Rubik's Cube, if you will. We planned retirement of legacy systems, which we're going to pick up workforce to pick up some of the newer programs in depth capacity. Not all those retirements have because of delayed introduction of new systems, partly because of Congress's unwillingness to allow us to retire legacy platforms like the A-10. I already mentioned Title 10 and 50/50. Again, Congress is all over that. There is a depot caucus that oversees that operation and makes sure that there's not $1 below that 50/50 line or other sources of repair. Again, Dr. Roper is interested in returns to the field and shorter lifespan series. I've already talked about some of the problems with that. And again, if industry can't be profitable, they will leave the stage. So you may be able to entice someone like Microsoft to come into the game, but look at the challenges we've had with Google and others over, what are you going to use my AI technology for? Oh, you're going to kill people? No, I'm sorry, I don't want to play in that game anymore, so I'm out of the contract. Wait a minute, you expect me to make 10% profit and be happy? I'm making 50% profit over in this industry selling glass to a cell phone manufacturer. So again, we need to make it such that industry can turn a profit. We need to make it such that there is good collaboration again. And I'll just keep driving that home, that point home. The collaborative piece of this is important. Back in the KC-46 days, the early days of KC-46, and I worked with Chuck on this quite a bit. And General Bogdan was the program manager. He used to come to my office quite a bit, and we talked about how to get the data rights. You know, that was sort of the poster child program on how to get data rights onto the program. You do it early, and again, that helps you own that technical baseline. What it allows is for the ownership of the supply chain to move to the government, as well as the integration role. You've got to have some really good people who know what they're doing if you're going to own the supply chain and you're going to be the integrator. So as that transition occurs, there needs to be a good handoff from the industry folks. The real challenge comes when you're trying to do something like this on a program like the F-35, where it's been in existence for over 20 years now. There were no agreements on tech data up front. It was a total system performance responsibility program at TISPR, where Lockheed was responsible for every aspect of the program, which frankly I think was giving them too much control. I agree in that respect. But now coming in and saying, well, we spent $5 here, so we own the millions of dollars worth of proprietary data that you generated or tools that you generated, as you can imagine, drive some arguments. Industry will give up IP, and in the commercial world, they tend to do that with their customers if it's 100% funded by them. But the challenge we have is if I want to use that same tool that I developed for F-35 on the F-22 and the F-16 here at Lockheed, or the C-130, I don't know that I can give up the rights to that. You're limiting my ability to market that tool any further. So that's where we come down and sort of stomp our feet a little bit, probably a little bit too much, but we do have that challenge to work through with the government on who owns those data rights. And then there's our more traditional industry folks. Again, there's that greater competition with these new entrants, the folks who are the non-traditionals, the smaller companies, the software houses, and so on. Frankly, I welcome that ad, and I want to be able to work open systems architecture so that we can take advantage of that. That's how we drive cost out of the weapon system. It's also a good way to get innovation in, and it challenges us bigger companies to bring more innovation into our game. Otherwise, as I said earlier, it's easy, 10, 15 years into the development of the program, in the middle of a production program, to sit back and go, it might be time to update something here. The warfighter's asking for it. Let's give them something. If I know there's a hungry, smaller company out there that is bringing something to the game from the auto industry or somewhere else, or the commercial airline industry, I'm going to be more apt to bring more new ideas myself. Again, all we ask for is a level playing field. That expanded partnership with government. We have public-private partnerships with each of the depots, all 5 depots that support the F-35 today. I had them on the F-22. And that ranges everywhere from software to hardware, repairs, commodities, and so on. I think that has to be the way forward. If the depots are going to be successful, if the programs are going to stay successful, it's the matter of what's the right blend, what's the right balance for each program, and each one is unique. We are focused on fielding faster, and we've already talked about that tech data and the loss of intellectual property. How does that affect my ability to do business in the future? There's obviously a 6th generation of fighters coming down the pike. There is a KCX coming down the pike. There is a CX coming down the pike. And if I want to build off of the things that I built into the 5th gen fighter and some of the current systems y'all are flying, I need that IP to stay whole. I'll license it to the government, but I won't necessarily give you full rights and data so that you can now give it to my competition. And now they have it for this next competition we're going to run. That's sort of the challenge there. So what hurdles do we have out there? And you see, that picture on the top is a young airman out at Luke standing next to one of our Lockheed field system engineers. That happens every day. That's how the jet flies. Out at Luke, those gentlemen in the black down there, that's a contractor team that is resident at Luke to help keep the mission flying. It's smaller than it used to be because we've got more blue suiters out there, and that's our goal, is to try to drive those numbers down. But that teaming is what keeps missions flying. Our ALICE administrators, our mission planning administrators, go forward when the units deploy. They have to meet the same requirements you all do going down range. They have to get the shots, they have to stand in their deployment line and get gas masks and all the things that they have to bring. They don't carry weapons, they don't do weapon training as non-combatants, but they do the same thing you all do going down range, and they're there with you to make the mission happen. Now, what do we need to work on? We need to work on unrealistic requirements. As I said, if I think this is my only shot in the next 20 years to get a new fighter out there, I'm going to ask for the world. Well, the threat is one thing. I've got to keep ahead of the threat, and we want to do that. But we got to make sure that the technology has been proven and advanced to the point where it's ready to go in that weapon system, or one hiccup can shut the whole system down and cause us to fail. So there is some opportunity for overreach, but we also have to have some balance there with what's doable. And we can incrementally, and that's the way the software community tends to work, incrementally upgrade. Again, you get your iPhone 12 and it's got a certain amount of capability on the first day with the hardware that's built into it. But through software, they continue to add apps and other capabilities with each drop that allow you more and more capability with that phone. Part of our problem is inflexibility in contracting. Too often we're held to an annualized period of performance on the sustainment side. That means every year, and I'm going through it, I've got a meeting with JPO at 3 o'clock today. Every year I have to go through Groundhog Day. I get a request for proposal. I work with my industry counterparts and the suppliers to get to a proposal that's TINA compliant, it's fully certified. I send it in. I wait 3 or 4 months sometimes for a first offer to come to me. Then we finally get to negotiations and we award the contract on the 30th of December. And next year in January, we start all over again. A better way of doing business is a multiple year contract, right? Give me a 5-year period of performance. When I worked for Chuck down at Tinker, I had 10-year contracts. I had 5-year base with 5-year options. I had award term contracts up to 10 years where you earned the first 5 years. If you performed, you earned a 6th year. If you kept performing, you earned a 7th year, and so on, up to 10 years. If you weren't, we parted ways and I got a new contractor. I already talked a little bit about incentive arrangements. We tend too often on the government side to use a stick when the carrot is the better approach. Let's get innovative and let's think about how to incentivize the contractor to do the right thing, to incentivize the right behavior. Ideally, on the sustainment side, what the JPO wants from me is to deliver spare parts and deliver repair capacity that allows the jets to be available for the warfighter at the rate they've signed up to. If their behavior now says, all right, I want you to buy parts, but I'm going to change the list of parts on you every couple of weeks, and I'm going to change the quantities drastically from year to year. It's a constant game of tag, and I'm constantly in, okay, supplier X, instead of building 100 of these this year, the government now wants 200. And then the following year, well, I know you spun up to get 200, but they only want 100 this year. We need to work together on those things and try to figure out how to incentivize the right behavior. If I've got an obsolete design in the field and I want to get it out of the field and out of off the stockroom shelves, I ought to be incentivizing contractors to want to get out there and pull all those obsolete hardware items in, bring them in, make the change, and get them back out to the field so you've got the latest and greatest capability on the stock shelf. Not when the maintainer pops that box out and puts in the older version, you've lost capability. And you can do that through incentives. We've got rigid financial rules, right? We proposed a PBL, a performance-based logistics contract on F-35, but due to color of money issues, it couldn't be executed the way we proposed it. So we're now approaching something that's far smaller in scope, workable, doable, it'll help, but it won't be as effective as what we could have done if we'd had more flexibility in how to apply the dollars. The big one's a lack of trust. And what I've found on this side of the fence is there are a lot of folks on the customer side who live in the past. You burned me 2 years ago, you burned me 5 years ago when I gave you this opportunity, I gave you that slack. It's not going to happen again. I'm making my contract more restrictive. What we find from our international customers is more trust. In fact, many of the program offices in Australia and in the UK and other countries are far smaller than what ours are. And what they have is contractors filling the holes in their own program offices. And then they are executing the program from there. And it's generally in a multiple year or multi-year arrangement. And it's performance based, where they don't tell the contractor, I want this, but I want it this way. It's, I want this and I want it by this time. Go do it. And there are less arguments over IP as a result of that. There are barriers to communication out there. We all too often get told, you can't talk to the contracting officer. You can't talk to the program manager because we have an active solicitation going on. That's when you want to be talking in the middle of an active solicitation. But because of past issues with protests, and we all remember the tanker protests of 15, 20 years ago, the community has evolved to something that is very risk averse and wants to protest proof everything. And as a result, in a competitive arrangement, once that RFP hits the street, the communication is all formal and by paper. And I agree, it's got to be that way to some extent because you want to make sure everybody gets the same answer to the same set of questions. But someone may find something that's drastically wrong with the RFP. And if because of those barriers, it may not get back to the buying agency. And then, as I talked about earlier with the Motorola example, that end user involvement. We on F-22, when we started down the Agile software path, we've got a company here up in North Dallas called Pivotal Labs, and we talked with the geeks in the Pentagon who do software and advise Ms. Lord on software. And they pointed us in that direction. They said, hey, go talk to Red Hat, go talk to Pivotal Labs, strike an agreement with them. So we did immediately. Within a month, I had an agreement with Pivotal Labs. They were training my software engineers. And the first time I went up there to talk to their guys, I said, okay, here's a problem. How would you solve it? He goes, well, who's the customer? I said, well, kind of me. I'm paying the bill. He goes, no. Who's using the system? Well, it's a young three-striper out at Hill Air Force Base, more than likely. And the answer was, then I don't want to talk to you. I want to talk to the three-striper. I need him or her to tell me how they're going to use the information and the tool that I'm going to build for them. I want them to tell me what information they need readily at their hand, right? How often do you use this information? If I'm developing an information system for you, I don't want you to have to drill down 16 levels to get the information and have to have it rote memory. Think about how Microsoft Office has evolved, right? If I want to print, I know exactly where to go in any one of those Microsoft programs. I can hit Control P, or I can go File Print, right? I don't have to think about that. Now, that's not the same way on Alice. It's not the same way on IMIS, on F-22, and it's not the same on a lot of the other systems that I've seen on AMC and ACC over the years, because we didn't design it with the customer in mind, the end customer in mind. We designed it to keep it cheap, but effective and produce results for the people who wanted the data in the end. And what I'm telling you is you got to get that end user involved in this process if you want to be able to go fast and be effective. And having that end user's input that says, I only need this data about once every 3 or 4 weeks. So we'll hide that over here. This data I want every day. I want to be able to punch a button and have it pop up. Or I want to be able to, think about it and have it pop up at some point in the game as we go forward here. That's what we're talking about, is how to bring that true end user in. That's not the staff officer at ACC who thinks he's speaking for the user, which he is. He's a representative. It's that person who is actually going to turn the wrench on the jet at McConnell or Charleston. Okay. So I personally, like I said at the beginning, I applaud what the department's doing. I knew Frank Kendall personally. I worked for him for a while. I think what Frank envisioned is on the right track. I think there's some really good things there, but I think they do need more industry dialogue and more partnership with the industry. I had 34 years in the business on the blue suit side. I've got a little over 6 on this side, and I've learned things coming to this side that I had no clue about when I was in uniform. And that was after 34 years of experience. Use the people on this side. There are some very knowledgeable people. There are incentives that you can use to your advantage. When I go speak to the senior material leader course at Maxwell, which I do periodically, one of the things I show them is it's not just about profit. There are times during the year where cash might be more important to me than profit. If you can get me on contract and get me paid faster, that helps me, because then I can go get this supplier on contract faster, or I can go buy a company that gives me direct access to a certain amount of technology. And other times, sales is important to me. At other times, having orders booked for the future and having backlog is more important to me. So there are tools that the system doesn't take advantage of on the government side because, frankly, you've never been exposed to them. When I go to DAU and Maxwell, I try to help folks with that. There are imperatives for force structure and capability improvements, and we've got to get capability moving faster. There's no doubt about it. We can't continue to take 3 to 7 years. When I first got on F-22, we were gonna take 7 years to field the next block upgrade. And this was after about 8 years of not spending any money on F-22. And the threat was going to advance well past us in that area if we didn't get moving. And I turned to my team and I said, guys, that's not good enough. I want a Skunk Works mindset. So we brought in some experts from Skunk Works. And we asked them, okay, if you were going to do this, how would you do it? And the answer was, well, I wouldn't do this, I wouldn't do this, I wouldn't do this. This is how I'd do it. I'd have this kind of a test program. I'd have this kind of a prototyping effort going on in parallel. All we were trying to do was put open system architecture on the jet to make it better for the future so that you could make upgrades like you do with a PC at home. You know, I've got a PC under my desk here. If I want to put a new graphics card in, I go to Best Buy, buy a graphics card, pull the old one, put the new one in. 9 times out of 10, I might need a software driver. I might need to change some switches on it, but it's going to work. And if it doesn't, I go back to Best Buy and swap it out for a different one. That's what we're talking about with open system architecture, is that kind of thing where I can go to, rather than coming to Lockheed or Honeywell, there may be another supplier that gives me the same capability much faster, that'll fit in that same slot and give me that capability that I need to go prosecute the war. The challenge with that is, again, going fast. Sometimes you stumble and we are going to fail. And if we shoot everybody who takes risk, you're not going to get a lot of folks standing in line to say, pick me next and shoot me next, because I might fail. If I reward the guys who are out there on the leading edge, taking chances, like those guys in the 60s were, we're going to get more guys like we had in the 60s, thinking that way. So I think we're moving along with better buying power. I think it requires that running dialogue. We need more trust and more understanding of what the requirements really are. Requirements need to be stated as clearly as possible, and there needs to be some trades. Sometimes I can't get you 100%. Sometimes, you know, the 80% solution is something that's more likely, and then we'll work to getting you to 90 or 100% later on. It may cost you an arm and a leg to get that last 10%, and I might get you the 80%. You might be pretty happy with that improvement. Chuck, that's all I had prepared. There you see some of the nation's finest around one of the best fighters ever built. I'm still a little partial to the F-22 because I worked it for so many more years, but I'm pretty proud of this airplane. It's doing great things over in the AOR right now. We're getting, at times we've had 100% full mission capable airplanes over there for weeks at a time. We're typically running an 80% MC rate overseas with those combat units. And we're doing our best to keep them there and get it there fleet wide. We're running about 70% overall at the fleet level. So I thank you for your attention. Hopefully I didn't lose the whole audience.
Yes, sir. We have time for a few questions. Bobby Fowler asked, do you see the Air Force going to an airline-style aircraft health monitoring conditions based maintenance capability, allowing them to move more quickly, as opposed to the current method of manual information gathering?
Yeah. Hey, Bobby. Good to at least hear your name. I'd say that's an affirm, right? I know General Bunch. I've talked personally with General Bunch. I know the command is moving in that direction. That's one of the things that the Rapid Sustainment Office is working towards. Again, that's one of those places where I think communication is gonna fail us, because when we were talking to General Bunch last December, just before Christmas, he indicated that no one from Lockheed, no one from F-35 had been communicated with on that project. So I want to make sure, or I think we need to make sure that we're covering, you know, the big guys at least, and as many of the folks that are working it. But yes, I think it's imperative. We're already starting to use it on F-35. We've been making prognostic health management system changes so that we can help refine the troubleshooting capabilities on the jet. And now we're taking the data and we're using that to refine the inspection intervals We did a lot of that on C-17 whenever I was at the command, and we're going to continue to do that. And I think eventually we'll get there. It's just, again, it's how much risk are you willing to accept and how much do you want to invest to get there?
All right, an anonymous user asked, can you talk about how these ideals transfer to the munitions side? It's great to have modern platforms, but if we don't have high-end munitions, what's the end game?
Yeah, I've got a lot of time at Eglin, 3 tours down there. So finished up as the PEO and Armament Center Commander, the last Armament Center Commander. I had that distinction. So I've got a picture on the wall with nobody behind me down there. But yeah, it's something that, you know, I always joked when I was down at Eglin that the armament budget was the beer money of the Air Force. You know, with your home budget, you pay your big bills first. You know, you pay your house bill, your mortgage, your car payments, your kids' education, your food bill, and then you got beer money left over. What are you going to buy with that? Well, you know, the services tend to go buy airplanes, they buy carriers, they buy whatever, and then there's beer money left over, and that's what they buy the weapons to. And so you end up, you know, it's buy to budget. Buy as many of these as you can this year, instead of having a real good plan that you could stick to. But yeah, I think we already are applying all these. I know Scott Jansen after me and Augie Genetempo were doing a lot of that after I left Eglin, and we were doing some of it as well. One of the reasons we have the massive ordnance penetrator and the numbers we have, the deep and buried bunker capability, is because we did just a lot of these things. And it was when I was working for Frank Kendall. I actually went over to the lab, the weapons lab at Eglin, and I asked my counterpart over there for a Manhattan Project kind of effort. And we did that. We did that in the background. We developed several different fuse technologies in parallel. And we were spending money possibly needlessly, but I didn't know if I could build a fuse that could take the amount of G's that it would take to get down as deep as we had to go. So I'd say yes, the answer is we can apply these capabilities.
All right, another anonymous login asked, how does the nationalized defense industry base like that in China and Russia compare to the US? And what are the advantages and disadvantages on both sides? And how do we compete?
Yeah, so I've been to China, I've been to Russia. What I saw when I was over there was kind of antiquated, but in some spots I saw some things that worried me because they were doing horizontal integration of rockets long before we were here in the country. In fact, I took a few pictures from their model that illegally and brought them back to some guys to see. So probably shouldn't say that openly on this thing, but anyway, it's statute of limitations, probably long run out on that one. But I think, you know, a nationalized industry, and it's been talked about here about nationalizing the defense industry. I don't see it as good. I think the competition is a good thing. I think you keep people hungrier. We're not talking about nationalizing the cell phone industry. We're not talking about nationalizing the computer industry. I'm not sure why we would do that with the defense industry. If you put everything under one leader, you lose the diversity of thought and the innovation. My 2 cents.
At this time, I'd like to return to our Senior Vice President for closing remarks.
Hey, thank you, Murch. That was awesome. I really appreciate the just straightforwardness of your talk with us today, and your candor also. You know, in my mind, I think there was a lot of great takeaways for many of us to kind of think through. You know, how can we apply some of that now, but also applying it in the future with things coming down. And it's not just about airplanes and ships and tanks and everything. A lot of it is a lot of the smaller components that actually go into these things that really make them do what they do. And you touched on software quite a bit. Software is here to stay. How can we apply a lot of these golden nuggets that you passed on to us to things like that in the future, especially for many of us as warfighters that have opportunities perhaps in the future to write requirements or write mission needs statements, as we used to call them, that eventually lead to these types of requirements, that kind of thing. So can't thank you enough for your time. I know you're incredibly busy. It was really great to hear what you had to pass on to us today. And I would offer to a lot of our airlift tanker folks out there and all the chapters, boy, any chance you're down Murch's Way and you want to get in and actually walk through a factory, that kind of thing, see how does all this happen, I'm sure they would be more than happy to have you all as the users of these weapon systems, take advantage of that. So Murch, hey, thanks a million. Awesome job.
Thanks, Chuck.